Jed. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Since I saw you last, I mean, you are like a podcast phenomenon. I mean, I see you. I can't even keep up with all the great conversations you're having here. And now you show up, you got a jacket on, you got a collared shirt on, you got a new background. I mean, dude, you're going legit on me here.
I don't know about any of that, but yeah, there's been a lot going on. What I've been doing, I've just been traveling a ton since I last saw you. I've been all over the place, out west, New Orleans, all through New England, and I got a little bit of time off, and I got a little time in Colorado with one of my kids skiing. So, what have you been up to?
Hey, I've been traveling a lot too. I was in after I was in DC, I got to Colorado and have been doing a lot of work in various places. A lot of work in Texas right now. A lot of interesting stuff, going on in Delaware even and Tennessee. So there's a lot of good stuff going on in charter world these days. But also just craziness in the space.
Texas is just such an interesting state right now.
Yeah.
Like, it's going in so many directions. Some that are really interesting, some that are concerning, like all at once, like a bundle of contradictions, and it's like not exactly clear how it plays out, and people are like moving there in droves. It's really interesting.
Fascinating for sure. And then I'll be writing about this later. I had an amazing weekend. I had students from Hooper Avenue that I had 25 years ago. Got together for a reunion, had me come down. So I got to see a half dozen students, one teacher that we worked with all this time. And to hear these amazing, amazing stories, Andy, it's just so.
Yes, say a little bit more about that. What was that like for you?
It was incredible. I just, these kids have come through such challenges, and a lot of them, about half, have ended up getting undergraduate degrees, and others are on the cusp of finally finishing. They're all in strong relationships. They have kids. They found ways to buy houses. One student is still living right near Hooper Avenue, so she is still renting. But it's just amazing to hear how they've pushed through so many things. A student also, not having his documents, had to go back to Mexico for some period of time before he came back. And I mean, gosh, what the tearjerker story was, he didn't tell his family that he had gotten his papers. He got them right before Christmas. He literally showed up on Christmas Day back in Los Angeles,
That's cool.
as somebody finally had his residency. He went on, got himself his undergraduate degree, is an accountant right now. It's just amazing. Just absolutely amazing. So, and whatever, some of this gets wrapped up into like immigration stuff and whatever, people's politics. But I don't know. I feel like you get closer to these families and you get closer to these people. And you're just like, who would not want these folks as a part of our world right now? They're making such important contributions, and I take such inspiration from them.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think most people actually, our politics are divisive around this. Most people agree on two things. We need like a proper border and some order at the border, but also like immigration makes this country better. It always has. And, that's sort of been our secret strength. And honestly, if you look at the data on the labor market, we also, like, even if you're not persuaded by sort of that immigration diversity makes this country stronger and better and more innovative over time, if you're not persuaded by any of that, you should just be persuaded by the numbers. We don't have enough Americans right now, and so we need people. It's a debate that does. I mean, I'm biased. Like, my family not very long ago immigrated here, so I guess I'm biased. But like, the debate doesn't make, outside of the obvious stuff around like border security and stuff, doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Absolutely. And then Claudia, I knew her as Claudia Granados. She's now married and has a different last name, but she was our kindergarten teacher. We created a school within the school. And our theory was, when I was hired, and it was funny because Claudia and I were both reminiscing that the school principal that hired us, we hired in the same year. And he told both of us in the interview process that Hooper Avenue was the largest elementary school west of the Mississippi. But then he cut out. He was never even there for our first days together. But Claudia now has stayed at Hooper Avenue. She's 32 years of service at Hooper. I was there for 7, right? So what she's seen and the commitment that she has shown to that place is just so incredible.
That's fantastic. Yeah, those we moved when my kids were really little to a neighborhood because there was a long time educator we really wanted them to experience and so forth. And then the district where we were, in their infinite wisdom, decided that was the time to make a change. After Ed to get these, she had been there for years and had just built a culture and community and loyalty. It was great. So most people listen to this podcast wherever they get podcasts, and we'll introduce the podcast in a moment. If you're watching, you'll notice I suddenly had to switch into podcaster mode. We were getting a little feedback, so I had to put on my actual podcaster headphones. But that actually is fortuitous because we usually forget to introduce the podcast, and that will remind us to do it. This is Wonky Folk. I'm Andy Rotherham.
I'm Jed Wallace.
You can get us wherever you get podcasts. You can listen on YouTube. We urge you to like it. That apparently helps us. And then you can find me at eduwonk.com and eduwonk at Substack. And you can find Jed at Charterfolk, where you can also sign up to make sure you get these episodes as they come out.
All good, all good. Well, again, Andy, you're looking just so official now, man. You're a professional podcaster.
With
But
the headphones,
um,
yeah.
I am really curious though to ask you about it. I mean, I understand. Look, I know how much I offended you by saying that you and Bellwether are so damn smart. At our in person in Washington. But I actually have these times in between our conversations where I say, I really wonder what Andy thinks about this. And I'm really curious what you're
And then
thinking.
the moment passes.
Well, I know I'm gonna get a chance to hear you, bungle an answer to another question I have for you. So let me throw. I mean, but look, what is happening in higher ed right now is just fascinating to watch. And look, I get some more blowback, or not blowback, but I get some more criticism or people questioning some of my posts these days when I'm not um, blanket protective of higher ed, more blanket protective of the Department of Ed, that kind of stuff. I get it. I get it. But I also I stand by what I wrote originally, which was I kind of feel like this is chicken coming home to roost. When you are higher ed and you have this level of dependency on the federal government for your entire economic model, and you've allowed the curriculum and the entire culture of your organization to veer very far left, that just seems like a disequilibrium that is waiting to be tripped. And that's what Trump has done in the last month or so.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I don't know. I think like it's a really challenging time. So for example, like what's happening with Mahmoud, I think I'm saying his name right, Mahmoud Khalil, the
Yeah.
Columbia
Yeah.
or former Columbia student. Like from where I sit, that's like a pretty core First Amendment issue. There's due process questions there that are pretty just concerning from, just from
Yeah.
a basic, again, process civil liberties standpoint. And I think you can hold two ideas in your head at the same time, that higher ed has in some ways made its bed with some of the things it's done, and that is like over the line. And I do worry now we're in this point where people are feeling very sort of um retributive, and they want to push back on things, and they're losing sight of things like due process and so forth. Like when you say this might be a First Amendment or due process issue, I don't think an acceptable response is, well, look at everything higher ed's done. You could say, yeah, higher ed's made some mistakes, and the way they handled some things is not great in the business model, and this is bad. These are not like, this is not an either or. This can be an and it feels like an and. So yeah, I mean, their business model is challenging, and they are heavily dependent on federal dollars. And also, I mean, the fact that the inability to stand up against the not sort of sanctioned free speech First Amendment activity, but stuff that crossed the line into violence and so forth. The
Yeah.
inability to stand up against that. If you're not going to stand up against that, then why are you going to stand up against Donald Trump? So it's sort of like, one way to look at it is it's just a mess. And I don't necessarily think Donald Trump's going to be the guy to clean it up. And in fact, he seems potentially to make it worse. But yeah, higher ed has enormous problems at a time. I think people are questioning the value proposition a lot, particularly elite higher ed. It seems like it's probably a great moment for sort of high quality state schools to really show why they're so important, and such a instrumental part of the education system.
Well, I've seen the reporting that Columbia has 20% of their funding coming from the federal government. I don't think that tells the whole story, even close, because you have other parts of this where you've got guaranteed student loans that are coming from the government, that are basically subsidizing the entire higher ed market. And I think the elite schools probably benefit at least proportionately, in that area too. And then you've got the whole exposure of the higher ed institutions on their endowments and whether or not they're going to get taxed at high rates. And so I I think it's very possible. And the reason I think that Columbia is cutting the deal right now, everybody's saying, "Oh gosh, it's all about this 20%." I don't think it's about the 20%. I think it's about basically half, half or enough
Yeah,
to topple the entire dang institution is actually wrapped
right.
into things that are subsidized, propped up by the federal government.
No, they clearly want to put this behind them, but I think the thing you're raising is important. If it's the same thing that allowed, the Biden and Obama people to come in with Title IX guidance around sexual assaults. A lot of people said, again, huge due process issues. Federal court said huge, don't take my word for it. The federal court said on multiple occasions this raises big due process concerns. Ended up, by Emily Yoff's reporting in the Atlantic, had a disparate impact on black guys, which, like, why, if you think that that's an issue in sort of criminal justice and so forth in general, why wouldn't it be an issue here as well? But they were able to do that because no one could say no, because everyone's dependent on the money. And this is the flip side. So now the Trump administration is coming in with a different set of priorities, and they're going to be able to push on it. I do think the one thing that, like, you're starting to see the courts are getting involved. Their executive order on DEI and then the dear colleague letter that they sent out and so forth is sufficiently vague to
Yeah,
raise questions. And I think you even saw
sure, sure.
people who have had some questions and concerns about DEI on campus and how that's manifested itself were also like, this goes really far in the other direction. So I think that's going to take some time. That's going to take some time to unwind.
But what do you think this means for higher ed longer term? So because I look, I've been writing about, I've long argued about the higher ed economic model, its dependency on these guaranteed student loans. I mean, when I've written repeatedly about the graph of the century, which has been titled by some other person, right? I don't even remember who first came up with this title for that, but it shows the inflation rates in different parts of the economy, and hospital stays and higher ed are the two that have had the highest inflation rates going back to before the 2000s, right? That is just not sustainable. And it's not just bad economics generally and it's warped, but it puts burden on the young people who are supposed to be benefiting from these places. Um, I just feel like we've got this. I think this is just the beginning, Andy. I think there's going to be much, much more impact as Trump continues to hammer away.
Well, it's been financed essentially in these various third party ways. So it was home equity and mortgages. And when that kind of dried
Yeah,
up, then it was student loans and that. So we've always had these sort of third party ways to do it. And now that that's under pressure, it raises some questions. I've always felt like you have to hold a couple of things in your head at the same time. One is that it's a mess. To your point, economically, it's a mess. The cost structure and the price structure is crazy. And particularly if you're a low income American, it's probably a good idea to go. It's pretty important for social mobility. And we can argue, now we're creating degree inflation, so people are going to grad
mhm.
school and so forth. But there's some evidence that the premium you get, if you're low income and you go to a good school, that's important. And frankly, with the way schools are moving on that, if you're low income, a lot of these schools, your actual cost of attendance is going to be pretty low. And I think one of the more irresponsible things this sector's done is sort of scare kids
Yeah,
about the high cost rather than saying, if you're situated where you're low income, it's actually not going to be very high cost for you. And I think we've done a poor job there. So you have to sort of hold all those ideas in your head at the same time. But yeah, I don't think it's sustainable. And I think you're seeing these smaller colleges are closing and consolidating, and you're seeing smaller colleges try to figure out what's their niche, if it's sports or whatever. And I think you're going to see a fairly substantial contraction. But what I hope we also see is we've had this debate that's just completely driven by the top like 15, 20 schools, and that we actually have like a whole tier of just fantastic schools. And I'm a little bit of a homer here because,
Yeah,
Virginia, like we're really blessed with just fantastic public universities, and everybody focuses on a couple of them, but there's like a much wider swath of them. And that to me is the kind of system that we need, that we need more of, and we need more investment in. And what we tend to key on this handful of elite schools, which is, I mean, there's a reason those are the ones that Congress dragged in and sort of set this whole thing off. Post October 6th.
right. Well, I guess you're a little bit more optimistic than I am. I just feel like the economics that are bad at the elite institutions are actually almost as bad in the colleges and universities that you're talking about. I understand that the price points are lower, the state schools are lower, but the entire industry has just had artificial, costs introduced into it, and
Well, not
and
entirely artificial. I mean, are you like, I mean, some of it is the way they compete now. I mean, like I know you recently went through a college search. I mean, you just like spend time like these dining halls and these dorms, they are not like it was when we went to college. They are competing on quality of life and other things. And that's driving, I mean, I don't think anyone can defend like the lazy rivers and so forth, but you do get competition around quality of life that students want. It's the schools are competing, and they're offering different things, and just tastes have changed from when you and I went. I mean, I'm sure. Did you
well,
see that with
maybe you see that as a healthy expression of competition. I just see it as an industry that is out of whack. Yes, I want to see universities have nice facilities and those kinds of things. But you look at like university facilities versus K-12 facilities and stuff. I mean, come on. There's
yeah.
something that's fundamentally different here. And I feel like these chickens are going to come home to roost. And I see it as something where the country didn't have the courage to direct the subsidy and the support for the low income kids that actually needed it, and decided to do it for absolutely everybody. And for doing it for everybody, making it universal, they warped and essentially destroyed the economy, or the economics for an entire industry. That's what I
Well,
worry about.
there's
Universal
some
vouchers
evidence.
doing, as well, right?
There's some evidence, and maybe it's analogous to the voucher. There's some evidence. I'll give a shout out to a longtime education analyst guy named Art Hopman, who sort of spoke some uncomfortable truths about higher ed and paid a price for that. And one of the things that his research showed was that you essentially, with what you're talking about, you got a substitution effect. So schools were taking this money for low income students, and then we're bumping their aid up the food chain to appeal to middle class students. And
Yeah,
he did, and obviously one of the things I've never understood about higher ed finance is you assume, of course, that if you subsidize something, you're going to get more of it, and you're going to see distortions and effects on prices. But everybody just assumes for some reason that doesn't happen in higher ed, and we're now starting to get that in K-12, that argument too, where you're like, well, if you do this, private schools are going to respond. It's like, oh no, they're not. It's like, these like rules of economics seem to, like, there's no reason to believe they don't generally apply. And so I think you're right about the aid structure. I guess I don't know if I'm more. You make good points. I don't know if I'm more optimistic than you, or just more like this is it's just how it is. And I do think I'm a big believer in. I think I'm just a big believer in big public universities.
yeah.
I think they're important, and we have underinvested in them in some ways, and we need to figure out how to rectify that in a responsible way.
Yeah, and I just think that when K-12 has this exit point, or one of its primary exit points, higher ed continuation, being so dysfunctional right now, I think it's going to ripple through in all sorts of ways. My daughter's going to be applying to graduate school programs shortly. The number of graduate school students that are having their offers rescinded right now, Uh, Also, the whole higher ed PhD, um, the students that are receiving stipends as they get their PhD programs. A lot of the work that these research assistants are doing can now be done by AI.
Yeah.
I just feel like there's going to be this level of disruption, and then all that disruption's happening, and it makes it easy, I think, for K-12 to sag back to this idea: higher ed's not for everyone, college is not for everyone. And it's actually true. Yes, it's true. But to like make it really simple and easy, or even more compelling, to make that argument without having to like confront some of the unfairness that's inherently cooked therein, I just think is not helpful for where K-12 is right now.
Well, yeah, higher ed's not for everyone, but I feel like we've decided it's not for everyone based on markers that I reject. So income, race, things like that. Like we need to do a much better job exposing kids to different kinds of options than letting them make their own choices. And instead, we've decided to make these choices for them. Or again, tried to like we've gone from a movement that was about like making sure that poor kids who want to go to college could, to a movement that's questioning whether that's a good goal, and I just reject that. The data is really clear. It's a good thing to do from a social mobility standpoint, insofar as it's something that you want to do, you're interested in those things. Obviously,
Yeah,
if your interests lie elsewhere, but the data is pretty clear that in general you're better off. And one of the things you see is even that people are like, well, you can make more money, working as a plumber, HVAC. That's true. Except we even see there a wage premium. College educated people working plumbing and HVAC make more money. There's something to be said for it, and it just shows up across the board. And one of the most interesting things you look at, like, and this goes back to like research like Ron Haskins at Brookings years ago, if you're low income and you go to college, your economic mobility, the effect is going to be greater than if you're high income and you don't, and which is like that social like instructional inequality, like just laid
absolutely.
bare. And so I've been just kind of dismayed at the sort of retreat from, again, not no one. I didn't ever bump into anybody who's college for all, like everybody should go to college.
Yeah,
I bumped into a lot of people, and I was one, who are like the opportunity to go to college for all, and that opportunity is not at all equitably distributed. And so, regardless of your zip code, if that's something you want, you should go for it. And I don't think we should back away from that. There was a article in the New York Times the other day by Dana Goldstein getting at that whole question, and I just think that is not something we should back away from. Sending
yeah,
low income kids to college, getting them to and through, so they're prepared, they
yep,
get through. It just seems like, that just seems like a core goal if you're in education.
yeah. Well, let's bring it to Department of Education. Let's bring it to K-12, because I
Do
have
we
gotten
still
some
do we
heat.
still have a Department of Education?
Well, I mean, I find this whole conversation fascinating too, because I've had a few readers send me emails saying, "Hey, Jed, you're not concerned enough about the damage that's being done to the department, and there's all these protections of our most vulnerable kids that we should be fighting to protect." My statement on that was, yeah, I can understand us being concerned about protecting kids' civil rights, but as far as I'm concerned, the way public education is done writ large in our country is one violation of civil rights.
Absolutely.
I mean, and who are we kidding that the Department of Education has been, a very strong force to push things in a positive direction. And I just feel like when the entire department has just become a enforcer of a blob of regulation that's just so disempowering to schools, that this again feels like a disequilibrium that was just waiting to be adjusted, to be corrected, to be toppled. Um,
Well,
uh,
yeah, it's
am I right?
interesting. One thing you say, yeah, like what do you think? Because I've been struck how, whatever you think, and we could talk about our views on the department, the conversation about it seems this very decontextualized from these changes in education around the country and everything that's been happening. It's like Washington off as an island, rather than like this is just downstream of like this complete loss of faith, and decline in achievement, all of it over the last decade.
Yeah, for me, the big things are, does special ed funding continue to flow? Does Title One funding continue to flow? And hey, I want the testing and I want the research and the identification of best practices, but that's kind of, you know, um, secondary to the funding continuing to flow. So, and I don't care. Does the Small Business Administration manage the $1 trillion of student debt? You know, uh, I don't have strong feelings about that. I obviously want there to be a continued investment in low income kids. I thought it was interesting that McMahon was clear. Hey, cut everything else, but I want to keep having the Title One money. Um, so the question I have for my favorite wonk here is the thumbnail is, hey, keep the money flowing, get the feds out, let the states do what they want to do. But all the regulations for Title One through Nine funds, they're all still there. So as far as I can tell, they're all obligated to adhere to those regs. And even if the feds decide not to enforce those things, any court would happily say you can't spend money in a way that's not consistent with these federal regs. So, I mean, if I were to say what would be an important next step or an additional step, or maybe what I would have preferred from the very beginning, keep more capacity within the department so that you can manage the administrative process of sunsetting or just narrowing all of these regulations on all these programs. I'm afraid that they're going to have so little capacity within the department that all of these regs are going to essentially stay in place, and the idea of deregulation is going to turn out to be a fantasy in the end. But you're the walk, so tell me, where am I wrong here?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. One, I do think I get the same thing. I get people who are like, "You're not freaked out enough," and like I think that you have to like the, when we're talking about education, for the most part, these are policy questions. I'm not a fan of moving student loans to Small Business Administration, but like you want to move them to the Department of Treasury, that didn't seem like a crazy idea to me. I don't think we should move IDEA special ed to HHS,
Yeah, yeah,
but
that's
like
more
it's I think in fact I think we should probably move Head Start from HHS to education, but like those are
arguable.
policy questions
Yeah,
fundamentally. um Other parts of government right now, we're having constitutional questions. We're having, like, in the judiciary, there's like fairly substantial questions uh about executive authority, about Article 2 authority, and so forth. Like, that's constitutional. And we talked about one earlier in this podcast with like the Columbia guy in due process. And so I
yeah,
feel like education, we need to be. I don't want to say this stuff doesn't matter. I don't want to say it's trivial. A lot of people have lost their jobs. It's all very consequential, but I think the degrees of what we're arguing about, it is important. It is important to keep in mind. I would watch for them. The short answer to your question is waivers. I think they're gonna uh in part because they seem to really like executive authority and want to push it as far as they can, that waivers are a way to get around some of those regulations and so forth, give flexibility. I think Trump would really like the spectacle of these governors having to come and ask for the flexibility, and then you have some kind of a deal that seems to really appeal to his idea of how we should do government. And so that's what I would pay attention to, because I don't think there's 218 votes, or 60, let alone 51 in the Senate, to really undo a lot of this stuff. And so they'll just be looking for other ways to do it. So that's what I would pay attention to. And I do think you're raising a really important point. There is a sort of shoot, aim, load kind of quality to this.
yeah,
And they've like gotten rid of a lot of the people they would have needed to do this in a more orderly, serious way. You're seeing that in particular right now on why they're trying to fix some of the problems that they've created at around the NAEP test and at IES. They've just let go some of the people you need to do that work. I think you're gonna have the same. You're gonna have the same thing. The way they decided to go do this at Maine Ed means if you want to have sort of an orderly process around this, it's going to be difficult, and so it may end up being chaotic, and sloppy.
yeah. Um, well, I feel like uh, I don't feel like this is a landing spot for us. And I kind of had a question for you, just about how
It's
much
also,
is
we
this?
should talk about something more uplifting.
But look, I mean,
I do think. Oh, go ahead.
well, I mean, I just don't think that this is a set of policies built to last. As soon as there is some national imperative, as soon as the Chinese do something that kick our ass in some way, where it's felt like it's an intellectual academic uh, competency issue, damn well the feds are going to say we want to have a way to invest in education that's going to be able to keep up with these other countries, and we're just
Well, that's
waiting for
the
that to happen.
problem, right?
What's
Like
that?
that's the whole problem. That's the whole problem. Like the Chinese are not disinvesting or like
Totally. They're
just
going in
saying let's
opposite direction. Absolute opposite
abs-
direction.
absolutely. This is the rest. I mean, this I think we should be honest. Like, are there some states that are gonna do really cool stuff? Yeah, absolutely. That's always been the case. But we're also going to increase the variance. And if you want to have sort of a national competitiveness strategy, we should be trying to figure out what are the ways we can shave some of the sharp edges off of that variance and have those guardrails. And so, yeah, I mean that's where I sort of part ways on this. Is I don't know how you can talk about any kind of a national strategy for competitiveness, a national strategy around human capital, any of it without national leadership at a cabinet level. And I know people are like, well, you could do it other ways. We could have a czar. We could do this. Like, I just think like you need this is important enough in the modern world that you need cabinet level leadership on it. People can disagree. I mean, that's obviously a falsifiable premise, but I think you're right. As soon as history will repeat. We'll have some sort of a Sputnik moment, and everybody
Yep.
will freak out. And so it's kind of like maybe let's skip those chapters and just get to the part where we get serious about a national human capital and talent strategy because it's so important.
Yep. So look, I want to keep going off on other things that concern me or other disequilibria. But you seem to want to. You had a more chipper notion to throw into the discussion here. So I don't want to get in the way of your
Well, it goes
even
back to
thought.
what you said. I'm not a fan of a lot of what's happening, but I do think it's been decontextualized. I mean, you can't look at the last decade and be like, "Oh my God, don't put all that at risk," because what you'd be putting at risk is like a steady decline in scores. Then they went off the cliff. This
Yep.
sector proved to be pretty unreliable during COVID, after COVID, and became hyper politicized. And I don't think you don't have to like look at that and be like, oh, okay, the answer is choice, or the answer is getting rid of the Department of Education. People can disagree about all that, but I feel like we do need to have like an honest accounting of where we are, and we need to try some different things because what we're doing now, if you are committed to whatever you want to call it, social mobility, equity, any of it, like we're clearly not reaching those goals. And so we do need to have some conversations. And even if you don't believe Donald Trump is in a position to lead those conversations, I don't believe Donald Trump is in a position to lead those conversations. There's still important conversations to have, and some of this is gonna create space for some important conversations about where are we trying to go. And I don't think the answer can just be let's just rebuild all the stuff like it was. Like I don't like what happened to IES, but IES
Yeah.
did need reform. Education needed reform as well. And so I think it's hard to balance all those things, but you can be kind of appalled at the sloppiness and the way it's happening, but also be like, we do need some changes in how we do business.
Yeah, and if I were to predict, I think there's more coming. We got the problems in higher ed. We have these problems now within the department and the federal investment, all those things. I write a lot, about the brokenness within our urban public school districts, and I'm starting to hear more about Republican governors who are realizing that audits of large urban school districts reveal things that are just so appalling. I mean, whatever. Elon Musk goes looking for problems in USAID. Imagine the same posture brought to our large urban school districts. And the underperformance of these school districts, the broken economics, the dysfunctional governance. I mean, I feel like this is the next place that Republicans are very likely to turn, and I think they're going to have an easier time with those entities. Now that may be a little bit more difficult because there's it's closer to kids, and so the disruption could really be heartbreaking in its very tangible manifestation. On the other hand, these school districts are doing such a crummy job serving these very communities that there may be real tolerance for disruption there in hopes of something better emerging soon.
I think you're right. And if we have an economic downturn, you'll have a number of these districts in fiscal distress, which will create a pretext for some of this. And as we've seen in the social media age, I mean, you people can be sort of aghast at the way the Department of Education they are, finding these examples of things money was being spent on and then holding it up as exemplars. You can say, okay, that's not accurate. I think like we don't do like large numbers. So you spend, you spend, $500 million and you find a few examples. It doesn't discredit the entire 500 million. We don't do that. But the fact is, in the social media age, that stuff goes around, and no one's accusing them of like making this stuff up. They're just finding these outlier examples. And in the social media age, the outlier example then becomes the defining
Exactly.
example. And we've seen that again and
Exactly.
again. And you will find that in urban school districts. There'll be plenty of those examples, and they will get held up. And yeah, I mean, I don't think. I mean, one of the things that's been a little shocking to me is just the arguments for the Department of Education, the arguments against what the Trump people are doing are not especially sharp.
No,
And I don't think it'll be any different with urban districts. And it behooves this sector to sort of figure out how to get into its fighting trim and actually have some arguments that are not just appeals to sort of lofty ideals about democracy and Horace Mann, but are much more politically salient, able to get political traction. I don't see those right now, and I think that's a problem.
the vacuousness of the Dems in particular that are the key policymakers in urban school districts, but also in terms of protecting the education establishment itself. I've been very impressed by some things that Ezra Klein writes, and by some of his interviews. I thought his interview with the pollster, what's the pollster's name that he
David Shore, yeah.
or yeah, I mean, I learned so much from that. That was just a great podcast. But I
We'll put that in the show notes. Yeah, I mean that David's data. I saw a presentation he did a few months ago, and yeah, people need to reckon with this, and I don't think there has been yet a reckoning around some of this. And some of it's about democratic politics, but some of it's about public schools and
absolutely.
how we position them, and it's a problem.
So, and I think that Klein has been, by the way, Klein's brother is a charter school teacher in Los Angeles, so he's got, a fairly good view into our world. But, I went out and bought Abundance. I've been waiting for it. And I'm just very disappointed by it. Maybe other people will like it. Because maybe there are things in there that are specific to housing, or maybe there are things in there that are specific to infrastructure building or to public health and this kind of stuff. But you cannot find the word education or schools anywhere in the index. And in my reading of it pretty quickly over the weekend, I could not find a reference to education anywhere. I could find references to cities being broken, and look at all these things that are broken about cities and why they can't live there, cost of living and crime and blah blah blah. Not one mentioning. Not
I'll
one.
have to check that out because I've always thought like we can't like if you want to have if you want to part of address, I mean there's a bunch of things to address housing, some of which don't have a lot to do with education, but having a thriving middle class that wants to live in your cities is really important. And if you want that, you need really good public schools and public options that people don't feel like they have to like navigate and thread a needle. So I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I just finished Mark Dunkelman has a great book on why nothing works that's being paired
Ah,
with the abundance
yeah.
book. So that I will have more to say once I've had a chance to read it. But that's the early Jed Wallace review is disappointing.
Look, I also care a lot about housing. I care about some of these other things, and I really appreciate Klein doing that. But I just feel as though, from an education standpoint, given the overweight of influence that the teacher unions have, I think it's a good litmus test. Are you serious about contending with the power dynamics within the Democratic Party, within progressive wing of the party,
Right.
um, or are you just providing lip service? And I'm sorry if you cannot address issues of education within your conversation about abundance, you failed a litmus test. And
Yeah, yeah. And the abundance agenda, again, like I said, I haven't read the book, but the abundance agenda more generally, like school choice has to be a piece of that. And we do not have to have a static supply of public schools. And it goes back to what we were talking about, like with the context with an apartment, you've got all these micro schools opening and little
oh,
independent options and different things. And like, again, I think people get all hung up on whether or not they like those or not, or where do they stand, or where do they think
right.
they should stand. Because rather than like, this is something that's just happening, and you have to engage with it and understand it as because it is happening. And I think it offers a way through some of these things. I mean, the charter school referendum in Massachusetts, one of the reasons that it went down was people perceived charters as a scarcity thing, that there weren't going to be enough of. And so like this general frame of we can actually have more, and that this is not just slicing up the same amount in different ways, I think is really important to get to a healthier education politics.
I just don't think that the current Dems. Yes, Klein can say we need new thinking within the Democratic Party. Almost all of the Dems that are currently in power are not. They are bought and paid for already by status quo interests. And I just don't. And we're seeing that in Massachusetts. Turn down every charter. You turn down an incredible KIP charter in Lynn. And
Yeah,
I mean,
that Massachusetts board meeting the other day was something. And not and it, I just looked at that and I was like, okay, they have not gotten the memo yet. And in Massachusetts, the political cost of that is probably more negligible, but that's not the case everywhere. Um, and like the Democrats' problem is they need to be competitive in many more places, so they're going to have to figure out how to be competitive on issues like this. Because the
they're
crazy
either
thing about the David Shore data is, I would argue the Republicans. I mean, Trump said some stuff, and but like they didn't really contest the issue that hard, right?
yeah,
And like if you look at how like Republican governors can contest the issue, and you look at what Trump did, there's a gap. And so in Shore's data, we basically had a draw on who do you trust on education without the
yeah.
Republicans really contesting the issue. And that I think should wake the Democrats up.
Yeah, it's a draw now when Democrats have historically been at 20 points or
Yeah.
so. And so, yeah, I thought all that
And it's
stuff.
a draw again without the Republicans coming forward with some super compelling agenda, which they could find their way to. And so, yeah, no, I think the Democrats they're out of position. We know why it's institutional. It'll be interesting to see. You've got some younger ones, so you look at like Polis, Pritzker, Shapiro. So those are the governors of Colorado, Illinois, Pennsylvania. Like they're all pushing the envelope. Will they continue to? I don't know. I was listening the other day to Shapiro was on the Bill Maher show, and like,
Oh, yeah, I didn't hear that.
yeah, and Bill Maher went after him on the education questions about some of the stuff we're talking about here, and he kind of deflected and so forth. But like, we're a long way out for a primary. But how will that, who's going to be the one? Gina Raimondo has shown a willingness to take them on. Who's going to be the person who realizes that actually doing that is how you show people that you're a fighter and you're tough? Is that you're willing to actually take these things on? I've always felt like people like if you're not going to stand up to the teachers unions, why would people expect you to stand up to one of our a foreign adversary
Totally.
or on other things? So it's a way to show I'm a reformer. I will look out for your interests. That this whole idea of like the people against the powerful, there's not like an asterisk on powerful, just the powerful who we don't like. It's like I will fight for you. And in a populist moment like this, which is really what we're living through, that seems important.
Obama had
And
this
kind of
figured
as
out.
you said, as Trump has shown that the emperor doesn't have clothes, I think the education politics is ripe for somebody ready to show that like a lot of these shibboleths about sort of democratic politics and the teachers unions, like they can be disrupted.
Yeah,
Um,
I think
there,
Obama did
there's
this.
a path there for a reformer.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, Obama did it masterfully. He clearly came out and took some pro charter school positions that rankled the teacher union, and Obama was like, "That's exactly what I need in the public sphere." And I just think people have essentially forgotten that. Polis is,
But then he
I
got
will,
tired. But then he got tired,
yeah,
right? I feel like, Obama's line he said about with Russia, and he said, they're never going to care as much about Crimea. We'll never care as much about Crimea and the Ukraine border as the Russians do, which was his reason for not defending that red line. Like, I feel like the same thing might end up being true often on education. So Obama came in guns a blazing on reform, but by 2013 they were backing off on all this stuff, and by 2015 with ESSA, the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, they were basically throwing in the towel. And I think it was like they're never going to care about some of these core issues around charter schools, teacher policy as much as the unions do.
yeah.
And I think that's a fixture of education politics that we have to engage with too.
Well, I haven't been in the room for the governor's meetings, but I understand that Polis is standing up in front of all the governors and saying, "How many of you guys have opened a charter school?" These kinds of things, leading his comments on charterness. So that's really interesting. Michael Bennett, is apparently going to
Yeah.
come home and run for governor in Colorado, which would be amazing in terms of like having another Dem governor supportive of ed reform driving an agenda. So, I mean, I hold
Yeah,
out.
I've never understood why more senators don't leave. Like, the traditional thing is you're a governor and then you go to the Senate, and then they all sit there, and they're frustrated when they get there. They're like, I can't do anything. I miss being a governor. That's bipartisan for a long time. So I've never understood why more of them. So I'm very excited. I think Michael is a fantastic
Yeah.
politician. Just a phenomenally smart individual, and would be great. And Jared has been, I think, a great governor and is a breath of fresh air. And I think it would be a fantastic entrant in the presidential race. I think he in so many ways he represents the future. So here's a little trivia question. Do you know who the last school superintendent to serve in the United States Senate was before Michael?
Nope.
Strom Thurmond.
No way.
I,
Good company.
I introduced Michael once or twice with that. I don't think he thought it was as funny. But yeah, no, you have to go back. You have to go back a long way to have a superintendent in the Senate. And I think that also the sensibility he brings to this stuff is great.
So let me just let's wrap it up here. I got one big.
Well, hang on, tell me, what other Democrats are you watching? I mean, you're a California guy, so we didn't talk about Rahm, and Rahm has come in pretty aggressive on the Democrats need to get better on education. And then I figured you were going to speak up for Gavin Newsom, who's now like a fellow podcaster.
Oh my God. Yeah, I'll leave Gavin Newsom stuff until that guy's out of office. I don't, I try to stay out of that one. It'll be interesting on the Delaware governor. There's a lot of additional diligence being done because he comes from a charter school background, was TFA himself, then appoints Cindy Martin as his soup. But then, just last week, he went to the charter school conference, unapologetic. Hey, you people are the future of education. You should be celebrated more. Sends out tweets, all that kind of. So what's going to happen with this guy?
And I don't know. In the chattering among reformers, he's like a mem stock. He goes up and down.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
like everybody's like, oh my God, this guy.
He loves me. He loves me.
And then they're like, oh, he's not. And then So I think, look, I mean, I think people always forget, like, once you go into that, he's a politician. And so we should expect him to conduct himself accordingly. And I don't think that chapter is at all written yet.
Yeah. Well, here's my last big category for you. I feel like a lot of this stuff coming from the executive orders, it feels just chaotic. It feels just, hey, drag it to the ground and we'll see what gets built up on the other side. The counter to that argument is that, Project 2025 was in the Heritage Foundation and all those others. They were actually working on a playbook for years. And it's actually probably made the difference between Trump's first 2 or 3 months now versus his 2 or 3 months in 2017. My question for and so there's some intention. There's some intention to parts of what they're doing here. And as it relates to education, though, um, most of what we've been talking about right now is rip it down, rip it down. Hey, there's some people on the school choice side and how they're designing their program. There's some intention there for sure, and they've been doing some thinking for a long time. But um, aside from that, is anybody working on something intentional that if we ever get other policymakers in place that would be willing to act with courage, there's something for them to run with.
Yeah, you're gonna feel like you're teeing me up because I do think that there's. I'll share. I do think. Yeah. Look, I think they are moving very fast because they realize they don't have a lot of time. You
Yeah,
will be a lame duck soon. Like I think you have to assume the Democrats are going to be well positioned to get the House, even as tight as the House margin is, the number of competitive seats. Like unless things really turn around, I think there's going to be a backlash. The Democrats will benefit mightily from it. Uh, so they know they're time limited, and so they are focused on tearing things down. They are literally they're just going fast and breaking things, which I don't think is a great way to govern. But you can certainly understand why they're doing it given the context. So Margaret Spellings, I think we've talked about this, has this bipartisan commission on education and the workforce. Former Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam, former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick are co-chairing it. You get a range of people. You've got, the head of the Lumina Foundation, John King, people like this, and then like Mike Rogers, who runs Workforce, Katie Jenner in Workforce in Arkansas, Katie Jenner, who is a fantastic state chief in Indiana. So it's just a total mix of people. John Bailey, who's known to the
sure.
wonk set, just a really interesting range of commissioners, and the idea is to come up with a bunch of bipartisan ideas on education, workforce, human capital. And I think, like, yeah, there will be, once we get through this first period, which again, courts are still working a lot of this stuff out. Like a lot of, things are getting undone and or getting changed and parsed. Some of the stuff they cut at education, they're going to have to put back out. It's congressionally mandated. So
Yeah.
they've taken out the aspects of it they didn't like around like DEI and whatever. And then they're going to put it back out. So I feel like it's still like, it's been an exhausting period, but it's still kind of early going. And so I do think, yeah, there'll hopefully be an opportunity for some ideas and so forth. And so that's one thing I would certainly keep an eye on.
Well,
And if not, like everybody's like everything's lost. Like I don't know then if everything's lost, we will address that when we get there. But like we are not there. We are not there at this point. So like we should all continue to do the best we can to try to address the problems we care about.
I wasn't going to go here, but I can't help just wrap up. Coming back to the Supreme Court case, it's the thing I worry the most about in the
Yeah,
landscape. And, I've had a chance to do a lot of work on the case now, and I've learned a lot about the legal arguments and some of the original intent for charter schools. I can talk more about the work I've been doing, probably in the weeks and the months ahead. But one thing that's become apparent to me is if you really read the religious liberty arguments, it's you don't have to have a charter school law, but if you do, you cannot discriminate against
right.
religious institutions wanting to operate there. And they say it over and over again, and I think they say it over and over again because they think it's a winning argument, and maybe it will be. We'll see.
Well, you can see the path dependence there with earlier decisions. You can see why they're arguing it that way.
But what it could very well end up, translating into is a shorthand that runs like this. If you're going to have public education, it has to be directly operated by the government. There is no way to have, autonomous parties operating unless you're also going to have religious schools, which is just not tolerable to half of the political establishment, which will likely mean in all blue states, charter schools will get absorbed back into the Borg. In red states, they've got the complication of all of these state constitutions that say that they can't direct fund sectarian schools, in which case a lot of the red states could just say, just make the charters vouchers. So your idea, hey, charter schools are going to be left without a chair in the game of musical chairs here. Well, maybe it turns out right. But what it does though is it just creates a situation where either the government's going to do it, or it's completely and utterly must be private. And so for all these conversations going on with Margaret and with John King and whatever, it would seem as though they're all going to be focused in this middle ground where, like, we got to be doing hybrid things. We got to have, and it just feels like the Supreme Court could very well hamstring future reformers with this case in ways that they may be far wider reaching than something specific to just charter schools or religious education.
Look, I mean, we talked about this on the last one. I'm hoping the court realizes it would really be crossing the Rubicon in a bunch of ways and decides that you don't actually need to do this. But we will see. It's gonna be an interesting case because, again, as we've talked about, there's only eight votes because Justice Barrett has recused herself, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens. But yeah, I think it is potentially consequential in ways like what you're the effects of it, unless I think it could really cleave things. I'm less worried about the idea that all the public schools are going to become religious or things like that. Then I think it could potentially really cleave things. Again, I think the dog that didn't bark, if you've noticed, the unions have been really quiet on this.
I know.
I think they think it's really bad for charters, and so they are doing that old thing in politics where when somebody's like shooting themselves in the foot, don't get in the way. And I think that's really telling. They're pretty smart on this stuff often, and I think that's really telling in terms of how the they're reading the potential outcome.
Well, we'll hope that they are careful about what they do here. But who knows? In this environment, careful doesn't seem to be an operative word in most contexts. So we'll just have to see.
Yeah, no, I mean the case, yeah, it's like the timing of it is these things sometimes are coming at when all the rest of this stuff is happening. It's something again, yeah, on the musical chairs thing. Look, I hope I'm wrong. That's one I want to be wrong on, but
So now, does this mean next time I got to wear a collared shirt and I got to wear, professional headphones and I got to have a new background? So I'm
I
like,
don't I
up
don't
to
know. It's
Rocker and
springtime.
Sanders here.
It's springtime. You may find me in a t-shirt for the next one. You just never know. I did a couple of presentations today on stuff, so you caught me dressed up.
Yeah, I'm more used to seeing you in tacky Christmas sweaters and muscle shirts and whatever. So,
What muscle shirts? Yes. No, I spent the weekend. My wife,
no
I don't want
hoodies.
to.
We did hoodies one time. We did
I was
hoodies.
wearing a hoodie. I was wearing a hoodie this morning, actually, for my first meeting, and then I had to get work out and get cleaned up and all that. So you're catching. So we'll see. We'll maybe we'll try to plan for the next one. We need wonky folk hoodies. Is what we need.
Hey, good idea. I like that. I
We can
like
give
that.
some swag. We actually give swag away to the listeners, which could be kind of fun. We
Yeah,
should think about that.
maybe we'll be doing an in-person one in a backyard that'll be fun. And if we had like three wonky folk sweatshirts for that one, that might be kind of cool.
Or we could do something different, like wonky folk tank tops could be fantastic.
All right. I like it. Always enjoy our time together, Andy.
Hey, it's great to see you, Jed. It's been too long, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Okay, take care.